In today's story, we step into a courtroom pushed to its breaking point, where 2 years of delays, missing evidence, and broken procedures finally boil over. What made Judge Mogen erupt in frustration? And how did one decision change the entire fate of the case? Nothing here is meant to accuse or mislead. This is a thoughtful dramatization inspired by real courtroom challenges, exploring how justice can fall apart when the system itself fails. Let's dive into the moment everything changed. The courtroom was packed long before the hearing even began. Attorneys squeezed past reporters, the air buzzing with whispers about what might happen today. After 2 years of back-and-forth delays, missing paperwork, and constant rescheduling, everyone knew Judge Eleanor Mogen had reached her breaking point. And although nobody expected an explosion, the tension already coated the room like a heavy fog. Among the crowd sat Daniel Reyes, local journalist who had followed this case from the beginning. To him, this wasn't just another legal story, it was a reflection of the entire justice system struggling under miscommunication, overloaded courts, and procedural mistakes. He adjusted his tablet and whispered to the intern beside him, "If today doesn't change something, nothing will." Across the aisle, attorney Lisa Hart, a public defender with 12 years of experience, observed the prosecutor's table with quiet frustration. For months, she had watched deadlines slip and evidence requests go unanswered. The delays didn't just hurt the defendant, hurt the families waiting for closure and the community waiting for accountability. To her right sat prosecutor Greg Harner, nervously flipping through his files. His team had been criticized for months. Some said they were overworked. Others claimed they were careless. Greg believed they were simply drowning in a system that demanded too much and offered too little support. Still, he knew excuses wouldn't save him now. Not today. At exactly 9 a.m., the side door opened. Judge Eleanor Mogen entered, and the room fell silent instantly. She was known for her calm, methodical approach, a judge who rarely raised her voice and never let emotions steer her decisions. But her eyes today had a different sharpness, one that made everyone sit straighter. "All rise," the bailiff announced. When the judge took her seat, she remained quiet for a few seconds longer than usual, scanning the courtroom as if considering every face in front of her. Finally, she spoke. "Be seated." Her tone was firm, controlled, but there was a heaviness underneath it. Without looking up, she began reading through her notes. This case has now been pending for 24 months. During that time, this court has issued 8 reminders for discovery submissions, 3 extensions for evidence review, and 5 separate compliance hearings. Every word hit like a stone dropping into still water. Greg swallowed hard. Lisa folded her hands. A mix of frustration and resignation etched. Across her face, Daniel tapped record on his device. Judge Mogen closed the folder slowly and looked directly toward the prosecution's table. "I have been patient. Far more patient than this situation warrants." Her voice tightened just a bit. But patience is not justice, and justice has been denied for far too long. A low murmur spread through the room, quickly silenced when she continued, "Mr. Harner, please stand." Greg rose shakily, already feeling the heat of the moment. "Your office has failed to produce critical evidence required for this trial to move forward," she said. "We have lost time, resources, and trust, and no meaningful explanation has been provided." Greg nodded once, but before he could speak, she raised a hand. "Not yet." The entire courtroom froze. Daniel leaned forward, sensing the beginning of something bigger. For 2 years, the delays had been brushed off as clerical errors, miscommunications, or logistical setbacks. But today, it became clear that the judge was no longer willing to accept generalities. She wanted accountability. From the corner of the room, a man named Harold Miller, retired court clerk who had seen hundreds of cases, whispered to the woman beside him, She's held it together for too long. This isn't just about this case. It's about a system stretched thin. Meanwhile, Lisa Hart watched with a mixture of empathy and relief. She didn't take pleasure in watching the prosecution get reprimanded, but she believed deeply in fairness, and she had spent 2 years fighting a slow, uneven battle. For her, this moment felt less like an attack and more like long overdue acknowledgement. Judge Mogen leaned forward. 2 years, she repeated slowly. 2 years of hearings, motions, and assurances. She paused, each second tightening the air a little more. 2 years. Wasted. Several people sucked in a breath. Even Greg's expression shifted from defensiveness to something closer to acceptance. But then the judge did something unexpected. She didn't yell. She didn't slam the bench. Instead, she asked a single question that shifted the entire energy of the room. "How," she said quietly, "does a system built to deliver justice justify losing 2 years of someone's life?" It wasn't rhetorical. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply honest. And that made it even more powerful. Daniel's fingers hovered over his keyboard. He knew this was the sentence that would lead his article. Not because it was sensational, but because it captured what so many felt, that courts weren't just dealing with cases, they were dealing with human lives. Greg finally spoke, voice low. "Your Honor, I take responsibility." But the system, she cut him off gently. "Mr. Harner, we are the system. Every one of us sitting in this room, silence, heavy, thoughtful. The hearing was only beginning. But everyone in the courtroom understood one thing clearly. Today would not be routine. Today, the truth, whatever it was, would finally have to be confronted. And nobody knew where it would lead. The storm rolled in just as Luke Mercer pushed deeper into the northern Arizona wilderness. Dark clouds gathered like a warning, swallowing the last traces of sunlight. His horse, Bramble, shook its head, uneasy. Luke felt the same tension in his bones. The wolf's growl he heard earlier wasn't ordinary. It carried fear, not hunger. Wild animals sensed danger long before humans did. Something strange was happening across this land. He guided Bramble toward the narrow pass between the ridges. Snow whirled in thin sheets, but Luke knew the terrain well. He had traveled these parts during countless winters. Yet tonight felt different, as if the land itself held its breath. He rode with caution, keeping one gloved hand near his rifle, the other on the reins. Halfway through the pass, he spotted movement, a shadow slipping behind the rocks. Bramble halted. Luke leaned forward, scanning the area. Another shape darted to the left. Then came a faint cry, muffled by the snowstorm. It wasn't an animal. It was human. Luke kicked Bramble into a trot and followed the sound until he reached a narrow clearing. There, huddled near a fallen log, were 2 young Apache girls wrapped in thin shawls. Their faces were pale from cold, and fear trembled in their eyes. Luke dismounted, raising his empty hands to show he meant no harm. "It's all right," he said gently. "I'm here to help." One girl stared at him silently. The other pointed toward the dark woods behind them. Luke followed her gesture and saw broken branches, footprints, and deep claw marks in the snow. Something had chased them. Something big. Luke knelt beside them. "Where's your camp?" The older girl spoke in a shaky voice. "Far we ran. The monster came." Luke frowned. "Monster." She nodded. "Not wolf. Not bear. Bigger?" The wind howled across the clearing, and Luke suddenly noticed how silent the forest was. No birds, no usual night sounds. Only the storm and the girls' shaky breaths. "We need to get you two to safety," he said. He draped his heavy coat over their shoulders and lifted them onto Bramble. The horse didn't protest. Luke took the lead, walking through the snow as fast as possible. Every few steps, he glanced over his shoulder. The storm thickened, making it impossible to see more than a few yards behind, after nearly an hour of pushing through biting wind. Luke found a shallow cave tucked beneath a cliffside. He brought the girls inside and started a fire. The warmth slowly returned color to their cheeks. Luke handed them dried meat and water, then listened as they explained their story. Their tribe had set up camp near a river 2 days earlier. Everything seemed normal until last night, when strange howls echoed across the valley. Not wolf, not coyote. Their mother, a respected healer, warned everyone to stay close, but curiosity drove the girls outside the camp at dawn. That's when they saw it, a massive creature with pale fur, long claws, and glowing eyes. It moved with an unnatural speed. When the girls ran, it followed. They escaped only because the storm grew heavy and the creature lost their trail. Luke tried to remain calm. He felt a cold unease. He'd heard legends from the Apache elders' old stories about spirits and ancient beasts that roamed the mountains when winter was harsh. He never believed them. Now, looking at the fear in the girl's eyes, he wasn't so sure. He added more wood to the fire. Your mother must be worried sick. At first light, I'll take you back. The younger girl tugged his sleeve. It will come for us, she whispered. Luke gave her a reassuring smile, even though his stomach tightened. Not while I'm here. Snow piled high outside the cave entrance. The wind screamed through the cracks. Luke positioned himself near the opening, rifle ready. He stayed awake while the girls slept, curled near the fire. Hours passed. Then, somewhere in the distance, the same growl he heard earlier rolled through the storm deeper, closer, powerful enough to vibrate the cave walls. The girls jerked awake. Their eyes widened with terror. Luke raised his rifle, every muscle tense. The growl came again, this time right outside the clearing. Heavy footsteps crunched the snow, slow and deliberate. The creature was searching, following their scent, getting closer. Luke steadied his breathing. He had protected strangers before, but never from something like this. Whatever stood out there in the swirling snow wasn't a normal beast. It was intelligent. And hunting, he whispered to the girls, "Stay behind me. Don't move." The fire crackled softly. The storm roared. And then, a shadow stretched across the cave floor. Judge Mogen returned to the courtroom after the short recess, but the atmosphere had completely changed. The room felt tighter, heavier, as if the walls themselves were waiting to hear what she would say next. Even the gallery, usually restless, sat frozen, eyes fixed on the bench. Whatever patience the judge had shown in the first 2 years of this case was now gone, and everyone knew it. She adjusted her glasses, scanned the room once, then focused directly on the lead prosecutor. "Mr. Harland," she said, her voice sharp but eerily calm. "Before we proceed, I need you to clarify something for the court." She lifted the folder from her desk, the same folder she had slammed shut earlier. "Can you explain why the crime scene logs for the night of the incident still contain unexplained gaps?" Harland opened his mouth to answer, but she raised a hand to stop him. "And I'm not talking about a clerical error. I'm talking about missing entries, missing timestamps, missing officers' signatures, and most troubling missing exhibits." She paused, letting the silence settle. "This case has been in this courtroom for 24 months. How is this still happening?" A few people in the gallery murmured. The defense team exchanged glances, trying to stay stone-faced but clearly aware of how damaging this was for the prosecution. Harland finally spoke. "Your Honor, we're still investigating those discrepancies. The department is conducting an internal review." Judge Mogen's eyebrows lifted. An internal review that somehow started 2 years too late. Harland swallowed hard. The air conditioning hummed in the background, the only sound in the silent room. The judge leaned back, tapping the folder lightly with one finger. See, that's the issue. Every time we move forward, this case pulls us 10 steps back. Her tone shifted sharper, colder. Evidence misplaced. Reports modified. Witnesses who suddenly can't remember. Lab results processed months after deadlines. And now you want to tell me you're still investigating? The gallery shifted again, as if bracing for impact. The defense attorney, Ms. Rayburn, stood. Your Honor, at this point, the defense must renew our motion to dismiss. The prosecution has repeatedly shown an inability to judge Mogen cut her off. Sit down, Ms. Rayburn. I'll address your motion after I finish with the state. Rayburn sat. But the faint smile forming on her face showed she already sensed a victory building. Judge Mogen turned back to Harland. I asked you earlier if you had reviewed the entire case file before bringing it to trial. You told me yes. She held up the folder again. This proves otherwise. These are not minor technical issues. These are foundational failures. Harland attempted to interject. Your Honor, respectfully. No, she snapped. Not respectfully. Not today. You don't get to hide behind excuses anymore. The courtroom went dead silent. Even the stenographer paused for a heartbeat before typing again. Judge Mogen rose from her seat. 2 years. 2 years of motions, hearings, conferences, extensions, and promises. And after all that, we're still discovering errors that should have been addressed day one. Her voice dropped, quieter but heavier than before. Do you know what that means for this victim's family? For the accused. For the community watching this case. She stepped down from the bench, something she rarely did. It means justice has been delayed and possibly derailed. Harland's shoulders slumped. The judge walked toward the evidence cart, pulling a sealed box from the top. And this, she said, holding it up, was supposedly cataloged 18 months ago. Yet according to the log, it was never checked in. No officer signed for it. No chain of custody. So tell me, Mr. Harland, how did it end up here today on my cart? The prosecutor had no answer. The judge placed the box down and returned to the bench. Her steps echoed through the silent room. She sat, took a breath, and spoke with finality. I am ordering an immediate suspension of all proceedings until the prosecution can provide a full, verified, and independently reviewed chain of custody report for every piece of evidence in this case. Gasps filled the room. Harland stepped forward. Your Honor, that could take weeks. Then let it take weeks, she said coldly. This court will not move forward with corrupted, incomplete, or questionable evidence. She turned to the court reporter. Record this clearly. Failure to comply will result in sanctions against the state's attorney's office and possible dismissal with prejudice. Defense attorney Rayburn's eyebrows shot up. She wasn't expecting the judge to go that far. Judge Mogen looked around the room, her expression stern but controlled. This is not a game. This is not a place for carelessness or politics. This is a courtroom, and justice on both sides requires competence. She picked up her gavel. We reconvene in 72 hours. Court is adjourned. The bang of the gavel sounded like thunder. The moment it hit, the courtroom erupted, lawyers whispering aggressively, reporters rushing out, families crying or arguing. The tension that had been building for 2 long years finally snapped. But Judge Mogen didn't stay to watch the chaos unfolds. She stood, gathered her files, and walked out without looking back, because she knew the next 72 hours could decide the fate of the entire case, and her courtroom would never be the same again. The tension inside. Judge Mogen's courtroom felt different today, sharper, heavier, like the final stretch of a storm that had been gathering for far too long. After nearly 2 years of delays, missing files, contradictory reports, and endless motions, everyone in the room sensed that something decisive was about to happen, As the court resumed, the judge adjusted her glasses, her expression calm but unmistakably firm. The prosecutors sat with stacks of folders in front of them, folders that suddenly looked more like reminders of their failures than tools of justice. The defense team waited quietly, almost cautiously, unsure which way the judge planned to steer the final stretch of this battered case. Judge Mogen cleared her throat, and the sound instantly commanded silence. "Before we proceed," she began, "I reviewed every submission, every transcript, every piece of evidence or what's left of it. And after considering everything presented in this courtroom, I have come to a decision." The prosecutors stiffened. Even the defendant, who had spent months oscillating between anxiety and frustration, leaned forward slightly, bracing for impact. "This case," the judge continued, "has been disrespected, mishandled, and dragged through procedural mud. We were supposed to be uncovering truth, but instead we ended up chasing shadows. No one dared interrupt. This wasn't an emotional outburst. This was clarity, precision, the exhaustion of a judge, pushed too far for too long." She turned her gaze toward the lead prosecutor. "Ms. Alden, for 2 years, your office has promised the court that the missing evidence would be located, that digital logs would be restored, that contradictory statements would be sorted. And yet, here we are with nothing." Ms. Alden swallowed hard. "Your Honor, if we're given a little more time." Judge Mogen repeated, and the room felt the temperature drop. "You have consumed 2 years of this court's time. 2 years that the defendant spent under public suspicion. 2 years the victim's family waited for closure. 2 years the taxpayers funded hearings that should have been resolved months ago." The judge's voice wasn't loud, but it cut like glass. "And now you ask for more time." A long pause followed, one of those moments where everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath at once. Judge Mogen shook her head. "No, that is not acceptable." A murmur rippled across the courtroom benches. The defense attorney glanced sideways at the defendant, who looked almost confused, hopeful, but uncertain whether it was safe to feel relief. "Your Honor," Ms. Alden tried again, "we can still salvage. You cannot salvage a case when critical evidence has been lost, mismanaged or mishandled beyond repair," the judge said firmly. "When key documents were stored improperly, when chain of custody logs vanished, when investigators failed to follow basic protocols." She looked directly at the prosecutor's table. "Accountability matters. Not just for defendants, for everyone involved in the justice system." The courtroom grew still again. It wasn't anger, now it was consequence. Judge Mogen folded her hands. "Due to persistent prosecutorial negligence. Due to repeated violations of procedural standards. Due to the failure to preserve crucial evidence. This case is dismissed." A collective gasp filled the air. The defendant's shoulders sagged, releasing months of pent-up tension. His family behind him burst into quiet tears of relief, disbelief, and exhaustion. On the opposite side, the victim's family looked devastated. Not because they believed the wrong person was walking free, but because after 2 long years, they were still left without answers. Ms. Alden stood frozen, her face stunned. "Your Honor, please, there must be another option. The only option," Judge Mogen replied, "is learning from the mistakes made here. Your office failed, not once, repeatedly. And the consequences fall not on me, not on the defense, but on the people who deserved better from the system meant to protect them." The judge's voice softened, not weakly, but with a kind of tired wisdom. "Justice is not only about verdicts, it is about the integrity of the process leading to them." She picked up her gavel. "This court is adjourned." The gavel struck, once sharp, final. But the story didn't end inside the courtroom. Outside, the hallway erupted with reporters, lawyers, and families scrambling to process what had just happened. Cameras flashed. Microphones stretched out. Voices collided. Some argued the judge had done the right thing after all. No one could be convicted on incomplete or tainted evidence. Others insisted that dismissing the case allowed negligence to win. And a few quieter voices wondered what this meant for every case still sitting in drawers. Waiting, slowly gathering dust, the victim's sister stood silently, speaking only when approached gently by a reporter. "We're disappointed," she said, "but we respect the decision. We just hope this wakes people up. The evidence had been handled right from the beginning. Maybe things would be different." Across the hallway, the defendant stepped outside, for the first time without the weight of accusation pressing down on him. His attorney told him quietly, "You're free to go." But freedom felt strangely heavy. 2 years were gun lost to a case that fell apart in slow motion. Judge Mogen's decision sparked debate across the city. Legal experts discussed system flaws. Law students re-examined ethics. Advocacy groups pushed for reform. And in the middle of all that noise, people on both sides tried to understand what it really meant when justice depended not just on truth, but on competence. In the end, court's final decision didn't solve everything, but it revealed a truth that resonated far beyond. One case. Sometimes justice isn't defeated by villains. Sometimes it's undone by carelessness. And sometimes the hardest decisions are not about guilt or innocence, but about protecting the integrity of the system meant to find the truth.